The D. Gary Young Museum was originally conceived and designed by Gary himself, who added the plans for the museum to the current global headquarters. Gary's dream was to create a physical opportunity to present the history of the essential oil industry. This museum fulfills that dream with early distillers and old extraction method tools, containers, and artifacts that are fascinating to see. Throughout Gary's 30 years of traveling and teaching around the world, and even visiting remote areas in search of evidence and more knowledge about essential oils, he continually brought home items or had them shipped that he knew would be perfect for our museum. Because of his foresight, we have these vintage essential oil canisters from France that were given to Gary as a gift, especially for a museum which didn't exist yet. These old-time metal canisters look like classic dairy farm milk containers, but they are also a testament to the power and longevity of essential oils, as you could still smell the sweet aroma of lavender inside them some 70 years later. Many years ago, a feeling came to me that the history of Young Living and the development of the farms needed to be written. There was so much history and it was continually expanding. I found myself writing while we were flying, and when thoughts came into my mind, I had to hurry and get them written down. I wrote and compiled for more than 10 years. And in 2015, I felt an urgent need to bring this book to completion. Perhaps because I wanted Gary to enjoy this tribute to him, where he could share his history with the world. Yes, I wrote this book, but Gary read through it to give his approval, and there are historical excerpts that he personally penned. This book, D. Gary Young, the world leader in essential oils, is filled with amazing pictures and the beautiful history of feats that he accomplished that helps all of us understand the magnitude of what Young Living is and the basis of our museum. Right here, you can see the picture of Gary carrying heavy clay cooking pots. And then you can come to our museum and see the actual pots that he personally packed out of the rugged Copper Canyon in Durango, Mexico. And I remember him telling me how heavy they were, but he was so excited because he knew sometime we would have a museum in the future where he could show these amazing pots. Another physical artifact that is pictured in this book is this amazing 3,000-year-old resin burner that Gary unearthed while digging around an old foundation in Shabwa, Yemen, the Forbidden Zone, where he had waited for 3 weeks to go. I don't know what the Minister of Antiquities was thinking, but when he saw the amazement on Gary's face, he must have felt an overwhelming, compelling feeling to give this to Gary. And what a treasure it is to us in Young Living to be able to display this for everyone to see. Gary was so proud of this. He even became teary-eyed when he talked about his experience, and he tells about that experience in our book. If there's anything you want to see, it's this old resin burner. A fascinating addition to the museum is a to-scale replica of the second distiller that Gary designed in 1992. He built it with a 40-gallon steel drum, garden hoses, and several pressure cookers that he welded together. He was so proud of his design that he always had a smile on his face when he talked about it. It is so interesting to see, and will surely put a smile on your face as well. In the former office building, members had a lot of fun sitting in Gary's chair in his office and taking pictures. When we moved into our new global headquarters, we decided to move Gary's office into the museum so visitors could still have the experience of sitting in Gary's chair and taking some really great selfies. Many meetings took place in this office, and there was a lot of laughter, but also many serious decisions were made around this desk. I have a lot of memories with Gary, sitting across from him at his desk, as do many other people who remember those times with heartfelt admiration and gratitude. As Gary's wife, I hope that you will have a quiet moment as you sit in Gary's chair, that you might feel his energy and influence, as this was a place of inspiration and reflection for Gary while he was building and leading this great company for almost 3 decades. Standing next to the old cabin brings back so many memories. I remember the first time Gary took us camping, back to Warm Springs, where he grew up in the mountains. He chattered all the way from Utah to Challis, which was about a 6-hour drive. But as we drove through Challis, he became very quiet. It was like there was a very subdued excitement. As we came around the corner, I could feel him just almost wanting to explode. He was so thrilled to be there again, and he said, "Mary, look, the old cabin is still there." And he hopped out and waved to me, and we stood there, and he talked about the memories of growing up in this old cabin. This is a 16 by 20 foot little piece of earth where he, his 2 siblings, and his parents lived for the first 4 years of his life. Gary always said, "Mary, I knew as I was growing up that there was something better that life had to offer, and I was not going to live the same way I grew up." What a magnificent comparison the old cabin is here next to our spectacular new global headquarters. You will so enjoy your experience of seeing what's inside the cabin, the old relics, the old memories. And when you come out and you turn around and you look at this beautiful building and you say to yourself, who was Gary Young? What kind of a man was he that could come from such a humble beginning, out of a terrible accident, creating the most unusual dream, purpose, the life that he chose to live in order to bring what he discovered to the world. Come and enjoy what you see here and see the things that he created that have been left for all of us to enjoy, to remember and think about and be grateful for what he's given to us and for what he's given to humanity. Many of the museum artifacts characterize some fun aspects of Gary's personality. One of our favorites on display is a 35mm film camera that belonged to Gary. In almost any picture you see of Gary doing research somewhere in the world, you'll see a camera around his neck or in his hands. And if you don't see a camera, it's probably because I was taking the picture. I used to laugh. We used to laugh because we all knew that any camera that belonged to Gary was guaranteed to see a lot of travel and really take a beating. This particular camera, used in the early 2000s, especially on his trip to help the Tarahumara Indians in Durango, Mexico, was probably Gary's last 35mm camera before switching to digital. We have many wonderful pictures featured in the museum, and that trip was also Gary's first humanitarian trip. This camera has a very fun story. I have a place in our home where I keep all the old cameras and equipment, and since there were so many memories attached to those cameras, I just couldn't get rid of the old stuff. A couple of years ago, I started cleaning out some cupboards and shelves and thought I would give some of these forgotten memories to the Young Living Foundation to auction. This particular camera, historically, is seen in many pictures going back as far as 17 years, so it was definitely a prize for some lucky person. Max Hopkins, one of our Royal Crown diamonds bid a huge amount for this camera at beauty school, so he could give it as a surprise to his wife, Karen, who loved Gary and photography. But Karen offered the best surprise of all to everyone there when she excitedly donated the camera to the museum. That camera has a special feeling for many of us, and I am personally very grateful that the Hopkins made it possible for everyone to see this camera of many stories here in our museum. This looks interesting. Gary's sled. Oh my. And I'm standing on the brakes. Oh goodness. You know what? I think I'll do better sitting down. Gary was always looking for a new challenge, and having hauled on the Alaska pipeline, he knew what harsh winters were like and had seen dog sledding as a mode of transportation. From that time, he always wanted to participate in a dog sled race. In 2017, he decided it was time to check this dream off of his bucket list, and he started visualizing himself racing in the Iditarod, a grueling 1,000-mile dog sled race held during Alaska's brutal winter that could take up to 2 weeks to complete. Even though Gary wasn't able to compete in the Iditarod, he did finish several qualifying dog sled races. Behind me, you can see his heavy red coat that he wore during the qualifying races, and he loved it. He loved coming over that hill, knowing that everybody could see that he was there, and he'd put his arms out, and he was so excited. He created so much energy for everyone who was watching. It was a really glorious experience for him. And he was such a visionary that he designed a very innovative and efficient new dog sled and hired a team of engineers to build it for him. This is his custom-built prototype that was tested in several races and worked very well. This is just a part of who Gary was, always inventing and creating something new. Definitely a part of our Young Living history. Gary was a man of many interests and was always looking for new activities he could bring to the farm. One evening, while our family was watching the movie A Knight's Tale, Gary became fascinated with jousting. Gary loved that era of history and began researching the possibility of bringing this time of history to life at our farm. He became enamored with the values of knighthood and chivalry, and so the joust began. The International Grand Convention of 2003 had a medieval fantasy theme, and Gary made his grand entrance dressed as a knight and rode in on his huge black Percheron horse, Goliath. That same year, Gary initiated a jousting show for Convention Farm Day, along with a rudimentary arena so that members had a place to sit and watch. The arena has been expanded many times because jousting has become a favorite event as an ever-growing number of visitors come to watch this exciting sport. Gary said that jousting trained his ability to focus, which is critical when combined with riding a horse, the strength to hold the lance in your hand, the skill to strike your opponent's shield, the balance to stay on your horse, and of course, all the time being a showman. Jousting has become a favorite activity at the Young Living Farm in Mona, and our son Jacob is carrying on Dad's tradition. And I still find myself taking a deep breath when Jacob raises his lance to the sound of the words, "Charge on!" One of the more spectacular displays at the museum encompasses Gary's love of historical Arabia and the Frankincense Trail. Our theme for the 2010 convention was the one gift, the gift of frankincense resin and oil. For over 2 years prior to convention, Gary traveled extensively to Oman and other countries on the Arabian Peninsula, such as Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, to research anything related to the frankincense trail, over which the resins of frankincense and myrrh were transported from Oman to other trading crossroads in the world. Gary wrote a historical novel, The One Gift, based on his experiences in the old world of Arabia. The story is centered around Shutran, the camel caravan commander who transported frankincense and myrrh throughout ancient Arabia several thousand years ago. I think most members are familiar with the uplifting, rich, aromatic blend, The Gift, which combines the oils used during that period of history and have now made their way into our modern world. Gary was never one to waste time, and so while having to wait about 2 weeks for his permit to go into the forbidden zone in Yemen, he designed 10 elegantly beaded dresses for his executive ladies in the office. Not only did he design the dresses according to each individual size, but he picked the fabrics as well as the jewelry. The dress that Gary custom designed for me, that I wore at the One Gift convention, is here on display alongside Gary's Arabian attire. I only wore it twice, the second time for our 2019 convention, Young Living's 25th anniversary. Oh, the dress was so fun to wear, but it was so heavy with all the beading. But oh, I just loved it. And it is such an amazing memory. An amazing memory of my amazing husband, who was always creating unusual and amazing things. One of Gary's most endearing character traits was his overwhelming desire to help people in need, especially the children. The scope and reach of the D. Gary Young Living Foundation is immense and has impacted hundreds of thousands of lives in diverse ways, from education to natural disaster relief. The foundation continually champions education, the development of economic enterprises, as well as ending exploitation and human trafficking so that all children have an opportunity to thrive in this world. The artifacts of the foundation are not tangible because they are stories of people whose lives have been blessed by the global efforts and the dedication of our members to this organization. We feel it important that the foundation has its place in our little theater where you can sit and enjoy some special moments. May your hearts be filled with the same joy that you see in the faces of those who have been blessed by the touch of our foundation. One of the artifacts in the museum is a larger-than-life replica of a Ninja Red bottle. Other than its giant size, the bottle looks a little odd to some people because it was the first Ninja Red bottle design. The launch of this product was the culmination of many trips that Gary made to China to research the wolfberry species Lycium babatum. This product needed a big launch, so this huge Ninja Red bottle was made so that a t-shirt cannon could fit inside of it. That made it look like t-shirts were being shot out of the Ninja Red bottle into the audience at convention. When Gary saw the first t-shirt cannon, he said, "Well, we better test it out, right?" So he and a few others went outside and started shooting t-shirts across the parking lot. It didn't go fast enough for Gary, so he insisted that they turn the pressure up all the way to see what would happen. The next t-shirt shot out with so much force that it broke a car window in the neighboring parking lot. Luckily, no one was hurt, and Gary immediately had a letter written up apologizing, offering to replace the window. Naturally, with that funny grin on his face. This was a hilarious story that shows how Gary was always pushing the limit to keep everybody laughing. One of the reasons that Gary and I traveled to Hunzaland in 1995 was because Gary had heard of people living there who were more than 100 years old. Gary was researching longevity and wanted to investigate why the people of Hunzaland lived so long and appeared to be in such good health. While driving into town, he saw the people working in the field, and he was curious as to what they were growing. He stopped the car and jumped out and walked into the field. It was a grain that was familiar, but was different than the wheat that they had grown on their farm in Idaho. That was the path that led him to the discovery of einkorn. There is a picture of Gary holding this ancient grain in Hunzaland on the cover of the book he offered, Ancient Einkorn, Today's Staff of Life. Introducing ancient einkorn into the modern world is one of Gary's great legacies. He first had Jean Noel plant some einkorn seed at the farm in France to see how it would grow. And it grew very well to their amazement, and they both became very curious about their discovery. Because of its limited production, it was never hybridized and is still in its ancient, pure form. As einkorn seemed like a viable product for Young Living, we planted seeds in Mona. And then when Gary purchased the Skyrider Ranch in Tabiona, Utah, he also planted the einkorn there. Einkorn is growing in popularity, but is yet to be discovered by many who I know will be thrilled to learn that Young Living has so many products developed with einkorn. It's fun to know that you could eat a grain that is not genetically engineered. They are wonderful products, and we know you'll love them. Sitting here in Gary's drafting chair at his drafting table brings back a lot of memories. He loved sitting at his drafting table, and many times he would call to me and say, "Mary, come and sit with me. Come and look at what I've designed." And I'd pull up my chair and I'd sit there with him and we'd talk about the designs. He always wanted my opinion. So being here at this moment is really a fun, touching memory for me. Gary was so exacting. He was so precise in everything that he did. What's interesting is that his Uncle Jack was a carpenter, a contractor, and he hired Gary when Gary was just a teenager to come and draw for him, and he taught him how to make plans. So Gary was drawing at a drafting table, making architectural drawings since the time he was a teenager, so it was very natural to him. If you look at this drawing, look at the precision of the lines. Look at this one. Everything was so exacting, just like everything he did. It was remarkable, the ability that he had. And he would draw the plans for whatever he wanted. Then he would take those plans to an architect, and the architect would do what they called blue lining to make it an official drawing. He had a lot of fun with the plans for what we have now as our global headquarters because he started those plans. He started drawing them when we first moved to Riverton. And he had simple drawings, and he would show me what he had in mind. And then he'd put them away, and a couple of years later, he'd take them back out, and he'd start drawing again. He'd change things according to new ideas that came to him. What we have here as our global headquarters was drawn on this table. And then he turned them over to our architect, who took those drawings and created what we have today. I know that when the museum is finished, we're going to take all of these drawings and we're going to put them in a way, we're going to organize them in a way that you can go through and look at them, and you can see the creative mind that he had and the precision with which he did everything. It's a marvelous memory for me to come and sit here and think about all the things that came to life through the pencil in his hand as he drew on the paper. One of the interesting features here in the D. Gary Young Museum is the history of Young Living, intertwined with the chronological history of essential oils from ancient times to the present day. You may be thinking that while Young Living was only founded in 1994, the timeline stretches back thousands of years. Gary was driven to discover what history could reveal to us and spent so much time in research and discovery, learning everything he could to bring the ancient knowledge and benefits of essential oils to all of us. D. Gary Young is, without question, the modern-day pioneer of the essential oil movement. The ancient knowledge that he has brought back to our world supports the history on which our foundation is built, enabling us to accurately tell our story. Egypt is often said to be the birthplace of essential oils and also offered Gary an invaluable education in his search to learn more about how ancient cultures produced and used essential oils. At the other end of the timeline, there is some empty space on the wall left blank, intentionally, because we are still making history.